everybody, my name is Grace and today I'm going to continue reading the book Who Was Milton Bradley? Chapter 2, Springfield. Milton arrived in Springfield on a warm June day in 1856. He had just one bag that held his clothes and the lunch his mother had packed for him. Milton needed a job and a place to live. Near the railroad station, he saw a sign for the Watson Car Manufacturing Company. They made train cars. While drawing plans to build machines in Lowell, Milton had learned a lot about being a draftsman. Maybe the late rail car company needed one. A manager at the Watson Company asked Milton if he could draw a locomotive, the train cars that pulls the train. Milton said he was sure he could. He didn't mention that he had never even been on a train before his trip that morning. The manager gave him some paper and pencils. Milton saw the pictures of locomotive parts hanging from the walls. The room. He based his own drawings on them. When the manager looked at his work, he offered Milton a job. Milton gladly accepted, then celebrated by buying a 5-cent glass of lemonade. Milton lived in a boarding house at first, but when another Watson company offered to rent him a room in his house, Milton was happy to move. While Milton lived there, he met the sister-in-law of his co-worker, who was visiting from Boston. Her name was Vilona Eaton. Milton and Vilona fell in love and wanted to get married. But first, Milton had to earn enough money to support a wife and a family. That's not so easy. The Watson Company factory closed in the summer of 1858, and Milton was out of work. But Milton was confident. He decided that it was time to go to a business himself. Milton rented an office in Springfield in September 1858. Then he pulled up a shiny new sign that said Milton Bradley, Mechanical Draftsman and Patent Solicitor. He would draw plans for making machines and also help people get patents for their invention. Shoe business was bad all over the country, but people weren't going to stop making and inventing things, were they? Milton smiled at his sign, then went back into his office. He sat down at his brand new desk and waited for customers to start coming in. But no one came. People didn't seem to have the money to make new machines or develop new inventions. Milton began to worry. He had used most of his savings to start his business, and he was running out of money. Then Milton got lucky. The Pasha of Egypt, a man of very high rank, placed a huge order for train cars with the Watson Company, and the factory reopened. The Pasha had requested an extra special car for his personal use. The managers at Watson asked Milton to draw the plans for the fancy car. Milton was able to buy a diamond engagement ring for Vilona. The Watson Company gave Milton a framed print of his drawing for the special train car. Milton was intrigued by the picture. It had been created using lithography, a fairly new form of printing. Milton had an idea. He could open a print shop and start lithography business. Chapter 3. Let's play a game. Milton's old friend George Tapley worked for a company in Rideau Island and also prints lithographs. Milton visited George and learned everything he could about printing. After 2 weeks of studying, he bought a printing press and went to Springfield. In May 1860, Milton put a sign outside on his office on Main Street. This one said, Milton Bradley, CEO, Publishers, Lithographers. Business was good, but by the late summer, things began to slow down. In the United States, the northern states and the southern states were divided. The issue of slavery. Many people feared that there might be a war. They were too worried to spend money. They weren't interested in expanding their companies. Business seemed to be slow throughout the country. Milton was frustrated. He still hadn't earned enough money to marry Vilona, but he didn't have any ideas. He was becoming depressed. By this time, George Tapley had moved to Springfield. He invited Milton to come over to his house for a visit. He wanted to cheer Milton up. George had financial problems too, but he didn't worry as much as Milton. At George's house, the two friends played an old English game on a board with the oval playing pieces. Milton loved it. Suddenly, Milton had an idea. Why couldn't he invent a board game? He already owned a printing press. He could print the game himself. Milton tried to think of the game that all kinds of people would like. Many serious people didn't believe in playing games. They thought they were a waste of time. What if a game could teach you something while you have fun playing it? Milton went home and thought about what kind of game would be exciting to play, yet still be satisfying for people who didn't approve of games. He knew that he could print board design in his own shop, so he wanted to create something unique, a game that only he could sell. Milton came up with a game that taught players both the good and not so good aspects of life. The board had 64 red and white squares. The squares were blank. The white squares had words printed on them. Some squares represented positive things, like happiness, success, bravery, and truth. The other squares had negative ideas, like crime, prison, and disgrace. Players turned a spinner to see how many squares they have to move on the board. They choose which direction to go. The goal is to earn points from the good squares and end on the happy old age square instead of ruin. Milton named it the checkered game of life. The board was checkered, broken into squares just like a checkerboard. The real life was checkered, including both good and bad. It took Milton a week to create a version of the game, with which he was completely happy. Then he showed the game to George. He thought it was funny that Milton, who was usually so serious, had spent so much time developing a game. But when George played the checkered game of life, he liked it too. It turned out that the normally serious Milton Bradley was good at making a fun game. Milton and his sister worked for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. They cut and printed each board. They all made pieces and spinners themselves. They assembled hundreds and hundreds of games. Now Milton just needs to sell them. He knew he would need to travel to a bigger city that had lots of stores. Milton decided to take his games to New York City. He worked with his assistant to pack up hundreds of game boxes and the design he had built. And Milton's trip to New York was a big success. He sold the checkered game of life to stationery stores, department stores, and even newsstands. After all, the games were sold. He had just one more thing to do. He wrote to Vilona and asked her to choose a day for their wedding. So that's all of chapter 2 and chapter 3, and I will see you in chapter 4 and chapter 5. Bye!